Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Falcon Kayak, and I just want to take a few minutes here to show you what I've been up to for the last couple months in the shop here, building full-size skin-on-frame canoes. So for those of you who follow this channel regularly, you know that I spent all of 2018 developing a brand new type of skin-on-frame canoe building system that starts with a set of mortised and laminated gunnels, more like you would see in a skin-on-frame kayak, and then uses a proportional scaling system to determine the rib lengths so you can build a canoe without having to build a strong back or canoe molds. Now, the obvious advantage to this system is that it's a lot quicker than the more conventional way that you would see a skin-on-frame canoe being built. The disadvantage to the system is that you do have to find pretty good rib bending stock to make this work. But if you can find good bending wood, it's a super fast, super easy way to build a skin-on-frame canoe. So what I did in 2018 was I focused mostly on pack canoes, which is just a small canoe that's meant to be sit in the bottom and paddled with a double-bladed paddle. And I developed a system for building those and also for nesting them together like Russian dolls, being able to catamaran them side by side, and having a little sail that pops up in the bow so you can sail across the wind or down the wind. So really fun, really versatile, very minimal, lightweight, probably the most boating that you can do for the least amount of effort and the least amount of money. So that was 2018. Moving into 2019 here, what I wanted to do was to really test the upper limits of this free bent system to see where it was no longer practical and wouldn't result in a good symmetrical shape. So I figured a good place to start with that would be to build a set of full-size rowing and sailing canoes. So the boats that I built were about 42 inches wide by about 16 feet long. I had a set of oars on them that would be meant to be rowed cross-handed like an Adirondack guide boat, and I put a little lug sail on each of those boats and tested them out. And overall, they worked out pretty good. I liked the rowing, the sailing worked okay and would have worked better if I put more time into it. But by the time I was done with the project, we were starting to head into the territory of a build that was taking more than 100 hours, more than $1,000 in materials. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's perfectly standard. In fact, it's really good for any type of small boat building. But the magic of skin-on-frame for me personally has always been a boat that you could build for a few $100s that you could pick up with one hand and throw on top of your car, because boats that are that convenient are boats that get finished and they're boats that get used, and that's what I want the Cape Falcon experience to be. So I've still got the rowing sailing canoe in the back of my mind, but I'm going to set that project aside for right now because I may be heading into more of a one design boat with that that's built over molds, more like you see a standard skin-on-frame rowboat being built. And for now, I'm just focusing on full-size tandem canoes and full-size solo canoes. So what I've got here is one of each, and I'm going to walk you through each of these boats, show you the features, and then talk a little bit more about where we're headed from here. So this guy here is my first dedicated full-size tandem skin-on-frame canoe. And my goal for this wasn't necessarily to get any particular design or shaping exactly correct. It was to really solidify my choices for my scantling recommendations and my skin choices and a lot of the construction details to give us a good foundation that can then be applied to a variety of different full-size canoe shapes depending on the desires of the individual that's using the system. So my starting point for this was just a basic kind of generic wilderness tripping canoe. So 36 inches wide in the middle, about 16 feet long, about 13.5 inches deep, something that isn't too fine in the hull shape, but isn't too boxy either. Something that I did that's not really necessary, it's purely cosmetic, but I love how it looks, is I added a little bit of progressive shear to the end here by building this up in the ends. And I also built a nice recurving stem. And both of these things do absolutely nothing for performance, but I think they make the canoe look kind of cool. Functionally, I've been learning a lot from just the different students that have been posting on the Student Builds blog. If you're new to my videos, one of the things that I have on my website is a section called Student Builds, where people get a discount on their plans in exchange for documenting their build. And this is a fantastic thing because it allows builders to share information with each other. And so one of the neat things that one of my students did was add handles integrated into the end of his canoe. And I saw that, I thought it was a great idea, so I decided to put them in this canoe as well. The only downside to putting handles in here is it means that once I take the seats out, I can't nest as long of a canoe inside of it. And one of the cool things about this system is the fact that it's designed to be able to nest canoes into each other was great as if you're transporting or storing one or more canoes. The seat system here is something that's evolving. This is pretty much the same as any standard canoe. I mean, you've got a couple of blocks here, and then you've got some bolts coming through, some spacers, and then ultimately connecting to the seat down here. These bolts are actually kind of clunky. These are going to get replaced with some nice oval head machine screws with cup washers for more of a traditional appearance. But overall, it's the same way that you would hang a seat in any normal canoe. Now, center thwart here, similar. This isn't a permanent center thwart. This is removable, which is really nice. And the cool thing about having a removable thwart here is that you can switch it out for a portage yoke, or something that I'm really interested in personally, you could use this to drop a rowing frame into here and change this from a paddling canoe to a rowing canoe. So that's something I'm going to be heading into in the future as well. As far as the overall just general shaping of this canoe goes, this is just straight off my existing shaping system. Now I've decided I want to make some modifications that we're headed into right now, but the shape that this ultimately ended up with is a canoe that is reasonably fine in the front, and that's important because you don't want to plow water, but you do need enough volume in the end of the canoe so it's not digging in too much so you have good maneuverability. So I got a good fine entry there I'm pretty happy with. I like the shape that it's transitioning into in this area. I feel like it's a good balance between something that's not too round but not too boxy. Heading into the middle here though, I'm feeling like I'm just a little bit soft in the bilge. And this is something that was originally a deliberate design choice for me, because one thing that you see commonly in skin-on-frame boats is people either go one way or the other to a boat that's too rounded on the bottom and it's too tippy, or it's too square on the bottom and it ends up being really slow. And what you really want, not just in a canoe, but in most types of small boats, is a boat with kind of a shallow arched bottom with a decent amount of dead rise that rapidly transitions into a harder bilge up higher, so you can get the benefits both of a narrow water line but also good secondary stability when you need it. And that's just kind of standard boat design 101. But it's tricky to accomplish that well in skin-on-frame because that is not necessarily a fair curve. And what a skin-on-frame boat wants to do, because it's built with bent ribs, is spring back into a fair curve, which isn't the optimal shape. So in shaping this, I was hoping to thread the needle between something that had a decent amount of dead rise but still had secondary stability up high. And what I'm seeing here and what I'm feeling when I'm paddling this on the water is a boat that does have a nice, fast, responsive feel. It has a reasonably narrow waterline, it has a good amount of dead rise, and it does have a moderate amount of secondary stability. I think I want just a tiny bit more out of it though, so I've added a new modification to the rib shaping system here just to fill this out just a tiny bit in here, get a little bit more of an edge to lean on. So that's something that I'm adding to the course right now. So other than that, I like the shaping. One of the big complications that is just common and unavoidable in skin-on-frame is skin-on-frame boats that don't have decks on them are always tending to lose their rocker and lose their shear over time. So you have to plan that into the process during your building and shaping system. And I lost about an inch of rocker in this, so I'm adding that into my plans as well, so I can kind of land where I want to be, which is about 2.5 inches toward the ends here. Experimenting with a little bit of progressive rocker in the ends as well, just adding a little more of a kick towards the ends to unhook those ends without giving the hull too much of a rockered and therefore slow shape. So I'm going to be gluing a lot of different blocks onto the inside of the gunnels here, experimenting with a lot of seat positions and just figuring out what I think works well for me and then passing that on to my students. And this is also another thing that's included in the courses, which is a separate section where every time I complete a canoe, I put a sheet that includes all of the materials, all of the different weights, all the dimensions, just everything that you could possibly know about that canoe, including my impressions of paddling it. And I'm hoping that my students will contribute to that as well, so we can start building a library of different canoes, and that way people can learn from that before they start their build, and the whole thing just grows organically from there. So that's exciting as well. So that's my tandem canoe here. Let's head over to the solo canoe and talk a little bit about this one. So this guy back here is my third full-size solo canoe, and the first full-size solo canoe that I'm really happy with. The overall dimensions of this are 14 feet long by 30 inches wide by 12 inches deep. It has the same 9-ounce skin with the 4 coats of polyurethane, and it weighs about 30 pounds. And it's framed mostly the same as the Tandem canoe over here, with the difference being that the longitudinal members in this are made out of red cedar to keep the boat a little bit lighter. These days I'm going for red cedar with my solo canoes and pack canoes, and I'm going with fir or spruce or pine with my Tandem canoes because I feel like a longer canoe like that really benefits from the stiffness and the strength of a heavier wood. Now, as far as just kind of my overall impressions of this boat, I built this boat 14 feet long, but I really feel like a solo canoe is a little bit better if it's a little bit longer than that, because it adds a little longer wide spot in the middle of the canoe to keep it a little more stable. But the reason I decided to go only 14 feet on this is because oftentimes it's a lot easier to find clear 14-foot lumber than it is to find longer clear lumber than that. And I just wanted to get a personal feel of what a 14-foot canoe would feel like in case that's the only option that someone would have. And I have to say, my personal feeling in this, being a 175-pound person, is that it has a good, reasonable stability unloaded if I drop the seat to the lowest position that it can be in and still have a safe channel to get my feet in and out if I'm kneeling in the canoe. So if I didn't have any constraints on lumber size, I would probably bump up a little bit longer than this. But for someone my size, 14 feet does seem to be enough. Now, as far as the general shaping for this boat goes, it's very similar to the shaping on the Tandem canoe here, with the difference being that the Tandem canoe is framed symmetrically and this canoe is framed asymmetrically. So it's a little bit finer in the bow, a little bit fuller in the stern. And the reason that's a helpful shaping for a small boat is because if you can part the water just a little bit more gently in the bow without immediately transitioning into a full section, not only does the turbulence start a little bit later on the hull, which reduces your overall drag, but it also lowers your wave-making pressure, because this type of a shaping is going to result naturally in a bow wave that is more oblique to the path of travel of the boat, and also a wave amplitude that isn't as big. And that bow wave is really just a direct reflection of how much energy you're losing in pushing water. So that's what it does in the bow. Now, the nice thing about having a finer bow, in addition to just the drag, is that also it means that you naturally have to move the paddler backwards a little bit to balance the boat, which means that the bow is going to want to rise to oncoming waves a little bit easier, and also it's going to be a little bit more advantageous in certain frustrating quartering wind and quartering wave patterns. Now, as you come into the stern, having a boat that drags just a little bit harder towards the stern of the boat also really helps to maintain directional stability without having the drag or the maneuverability penalty of having a skeg hanging off the stern of your boat. So there's lots of functional advantages to going with an asymmetrical shape. And the asymmetry on this guy is not very much like it is in my kayaks. I'm going to work my way into this slowly as I get to know these boats, maybe go a little bit more each new boat that I build. Now, as far as the shaping on the deck goes, I've added just a little bit more shear in the bow here just to get it up a little bit more in case I hit any big waves, a little bit lower in the stern. And then I also added these wedges towards the ends here and that fancy recurving stem, both of which are completely cosmetic and don't really do anything, but do make the boat look kind of cool. For the seat in this particular canoe, I decided to order this really nice curved drop seat from North Star Canoes. You can make your own seats for canoes. It's not really that hard, but it is a little bit time consuming. And considering that canoe seats are pretty cheap, I usually just order them off the internet. So this is a beautiful seat, once again, from North Star Canoes. And the reason I like a drop seat for a solo canoe like this is it keeps the rails nice and high. So I can bolt this with very minimal spacer blocks to the gunnels here, and it allows this seat to be the stiffening thwart for the center of the canoe, so I don't have to have any other thwarts in here. Now, if you remember from the pack canoe videos and other videos, these canoes are designed to be used without thwarts if you want to, so you can nest them together. And that's exactly what I'm doing with these. I take the seats out of the larger canoe, I put the smaller canoe inside of it, and it's nice because I can store two canoes in the same space as one. But when you're paddling, generally you want something stiffening the canoe so it doesn't feel so flexy. So something I just want to show here, because this is a question that I get all the time, is how I protect the the bottom of my skin boats. And what I like to do, instead of installing something like floorboards and adding a bunch of extra weight to the canoe, is just get these really simple, wide, long Thermarest ridge rest mats. And I like these because they're inexpensive, they're fairly comfortable, they trap a lot of grit in the bottom of the canoe, and they can also be folded over for extra comfort while you're kneeling. And I feel like if you go to the time and the effort to make something as nice as a lightweight skin boat, it doesn't make sense to weigh it down with a bunch of extra heavy floorboards if you don't need to. So that's just a general good tip for anybody that's building skin-on-frame boats. So this is my most recent batch of full-size canoes. Now, as far as how these are actually paddling, I don't have enough experience as a canoeist to really make any informed judgments there. So I'm looking forward to loaning these out to people who are more experienced canoeists. And if you're in the Portland area, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to loan you the boats. I would love to get your feedback on how these are paddling so I can incorporate modifications into the next versions of them. But for right now, I'm just really enjoying the process of being a novice canoeist and also being a novice canoe designer and just developing the overall building system. I think what I'm going to do is just sit with these for a few months, get to know these particular canoes, and then also do some of the modifications as well. Just because these aren't pack canoes doesn't mean they can't be modified in the same way. So I'm definitely going to be setting these two boats up with a catamaran system to be used with 2 people or even 3 people. Really fun way to run a swift water river, especially if you're with someone who isn't an experienced canoeist, so they don't have to learn river reading skills and tandem canoeing skills at the same time. It's also just kind of a neat, fun thing to do. I'll definitely be adding a sail to the larger one and experimenting with that with a rudder and the catamaran mode. And then something that I'm super excited about personally is dropping a rowing frame into this tandem canoe here, because even though I enjoy paddling a canoe, I'm really a rower at heart. I love to get behind a set of oars, and there's no reason that I can't put a rowing frame right in the middle of this. And I think it'll make a pretty nice little rowboat. And that's kind of the cool thing about building with this system is the modularity of it. You can start with a few $100s and a few weeks of work, come out with a good canoe. You can get on the water and enjoy it and then try other things as time and money permits. So I think that's it for now. As always, there's a ton more pictures and videos and information on my website, and we do have a beta version of this canoe building course up on the website for sale right now, and I am constantly updating the course, constantly updating the videos to make it better and better. Okay, that's it for now. Take care. I will see you next time.